Welcome to LinkedUp, Breaking Boundaries in Education, a podcast that focuses on what is happening in education today, connecting everyone to the movers and shakers that are breaking boundaries in the education arena.
Welcome to LinkedUp, Breaking Boundaries in Education. Jamie and Jerry are here for another amazing conversation. You know, Jerry, when I email schools, I try to figure out the right time. I try to figure out, sometimes people answer at certain times of the day, and sometimes their emails get, bogged down by tons at the same time. So I try to navigate that. I try to bold things in my subject. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't work. And I need some tips on how to best communicate with people who are they're busy with things. And I get it. I know I'm not being ignored, although I think sometimes I'm being ignored, but I want to figure out the best way. And we have a great guest today to teach us.
We do. So, Jamie, let's just go to the top. Let's go to Todd Rogers, who is a Harvard professor, and he is a behavioral scientist. He is also the lead in Everyday Labs, and he's working to help school districts reduce absenteeism. And this is done through communication, which is, I think, key. And then he is also advising school districts and city councils on how to communicate effectively.
Ooh, yes.
Now, I know every single district I have been in, whenever you do some kind of survey, parents, teachers, everyone says, the biggest problem we have here is communication. And I know that being in all of those roles from teacher to superintendent, I always thought I was communicating well.
Yeah.
But evidently we're not. And I had the privilege of listening to Todd speak twice, once in person and the second time virtually. And I was so intrigued with his message that came back and said, Jamie, we have to get him on the podcast.
Right.
So without further ado, Todd, we welcome you to LinkedUp, Breaking Boundaries in Education.
Thank you, Jerry. And thank you, Jamie. It is great to be here, and I'm looking forward to having a good conversation with you.
We're going to have a great conversation. So, as a behavioral scientist at Harvard, whoa, tell us, what do you do? What is that?
Was there a question mark after the whoa?
Yes. Whoa.
So behavioral scientist just means I study the science of behavior change, and that borrows liberally from all sorts of disciplines, from psychology to economics, behavioral economics, sociology, education, political science. And basically, what are the most powerful tools for helping people be more effective when they communicate, but also follow through on the things they intend to do. And so I worked for a while in voting, on how to increase voter participation, about 10 years, and worked in politics. And then for the last 11 years, it's been entirely about how do we develop interventions to help families, help kids outside of school. And they are all ultimately communications interventions.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So what have been some of your findings as you've studied behavior and communication? Communication, I think, is the toughest piece.
It's the most important piece, right? Everything falls apart if the communication is not there. And sometimes we overlook it because it seems so natural. Of course, we're going to communicate, and we're going to pass that off. But are you doing it, as often as you should, or too often? I mean, there's so many different techniques that need to be considered. And we think we're doing a good job, but I think when you unpeel things, you realize lots need to be done.
I love that, Jamie. I think you're totally right. So like in one sense, everything is communication, in that there's no way to deliver something to people without it ultimately being some interface between the thing itself and the person encountering it and interpreting it. I often think people in education especially sometimes talk about modes of communicating like they are an intervention. I was working on a paper called Texting is Not an Intervention, where texting is a mode of communicating.
Yes.
And whether it is effective or not depends on who's sending it, what it says, when it's received, who receives it, what it's about. And ultimately, like that, all of that is the content. But the modality of delivering information is not itself an intervention. I feel like people often act like, oh, we're emailing or texting, like that itself is some kind of communication. The communication is what is contained in those modes of communication.
Right.
I just wrote that down.
Yeah, I didn't end up writing the paper because I'm kind of lazy, and so I outlined it. Had a collaborator. We were sketching out. It was just going to be provocative. Texting is not an intervention, and then we had a really great outline. I could share it with you, but unfortunately, I'm never going to write it.
Oh, maybe you'll get back to it now.
There's so many more important things right now, like the things we're going to talk about, Jerry.
Right, but it is interesting because everyone has their favorite way of communicating. Like for me, I do prefer texting because I think it's short and concise and it gets to the point. I prefer that over emails. But so a few years ago, we started a virtual school and we found that we couldn't communicate with parents. They were not responding. When teachers started texting parents, they started to respond. So I guess it's the person. And that was just the mode that worked then, but that was 10 years ago.
But it wasn't, it was the teacher of the school, the teacher of the student communicating with the parent. Like there's no better communicator than a personal communication from the person who spends the day with your kid, caring for your kid. So like text was the modality. It could have been an app. It could have been literally handwritten like postcards, and it would have been effective because it's ultimately the teacher. But when we think about modality, which is not something I think, Jerry, as we were sort of walking through the outline for this, there is something like with modality that I think is really interesting. What you want is the mode of communicating to match the kind of action being requested. And so I've done a lot on reducing student absenteeism, which is why we started outside of my Harvard lab. We spun out a separate organization to scale up the absence reduction interventions. The organization is called Everyday Labs. And one of the things that we've learned is that communicating, we could talk about the content, it's all very like tested and psychological, but that the most effective modality for the communications we have on absenteeism is printed mail. It dominates text, it dominates email. And one of the reasons is because we have way better coverage. So for those of you who work in schools, and I know ClassLink would know this, that the valid digital contact information for the lowest performing and most disadvantaged kids is really poor. The coverage is really bad. Even though you have a number, it's often not valid and you don't get feedback on it, or even email address, it's often not valid and you don't get feedback on it. So you think your coverage is greater than it is. One is coverage, but the other reason is because when you're trying to increase attendance, if I text you and say exactly what I would send in hard copy, but something to motivate you to reduce absenteeism, text, you consume it, and then it disappears. And text, we've shown lots of great research where like, if you text saying your kid didn't turn in their homework today and you get the text at 5 p.m., the kid turns the homework in the next day. There's an immediate action that you're prompting the moment the communication is consumed. But if I'm saying in general, your kid misses 1 day every 2 weeks, please miss less. And I texted, there's no immediate action. So the modality is not very well conducive to a behavior that it spans over time. We call this in behavioral science, how do you bridge time? So like I'm communicating now and the behavior we're focusing on occurs in the future. So you need some strategy for bridging time between the moment of the communication and the behavior. So what we find with hard copy is the vast majority of families, if it's interesting and useful to share, and that's not making it entertaining, it's making it useful, parents put it on the fridge, they put it on the kitchen counter. It becomes, the phrase we use is it becomes a social artifact in the home. And when the challenge is to bridge time, like just digital stuff is really, really bad at that, but it's awesome for something right now. Like your kid skipped class today. Like it turns out parents are pretty good at making sure that doesn't happen tomorrow. Right. And if you alert them of it, they're good at it. But like your kid misses 1 day every 2 weeks and you send it on a Tuesday at 5 p.m. Like it's just not, the modality should match the objective.
Yes. And do you think that getting mail in the mail seems more has more authority, maybe, too?
It's awesome. That's such a great question, because one of the things that really, we work with a lot of the large districts around the country. Everyday Labs does, to reduce absenteeism district wide, and they have very large, really tragically high fraction of students who are experiencing homelessness. And one of the things that has been surprising to these districts and to us is that the students experiencing homelessness, mail is often the best modality to reach them at, because families keep the U.S. Postal Service updated. There's a national change of address clearinghouse where they tell the Postal Service where to forward it. All official communications from the city, state, and federal governments go through the mail. And so they keep it updated and they actually collect their mail. Whereas cell phones, if you don't pay the bill or you can't pay the bill, you have to get a new phone. Email address, I don't really understand the life cycle of an email address very well, but it doesn't appear to be as effective. But hard copy, families experiencing homelessness are particularly attentive to keep making sure there is a forwarding address through the U.S. Postal Service, the National Change of Address database, so that federal, state, and city communications, which are all the official important communications, are all sent through mail, so they are collected. And so
that's interesting.
It is, right? It's counterintuitive.
Yes.
It is. Absolutely.
I love this research. So basically what we're saying then is that you really need to think, you have to know what your reason is, know your why. And that is going to help drive your decision-making for the best way to communicate. And then I love that concept of bridging time. That makes so much sense, right? The immediacy is going to be, sure, if you need something done for tomorrow, make sure that's a text, and that's going to be the best way. But you made me think too about mail. It does. So when you get a mail about a board meeting coming up or something important, it goes on the refrigerator, or it goes in my, I put it in the calendar, but I also kind of keep it in a special little section so I can share it with everyone, right? It's a little bit more visible, it's tangible, and it doesn't just get piled on with, everything else. It has a special place. I like that. It's never really thought about that, because I felt like, perhaps mail was kind of going away, but it is the important things that stick out. It's accessible to everyone that way, because you mentioned some families may not have email or digital access, right? So that access issue is taken care of. You pointed out even those who are homeless, well, they're getting it too. And then it just becomes more sustainable because it does bridge that time.
Yeah, one interesting, so like a version of thinking about mail is like, okay, it's hard copy that is delivered through the Postal Service. You could think hard copy delivered through the child. And you both have been classroom teachers and district leaders. Like, it turns out not everything put in the backpack gets to the parents.
No, it's either buried in the backpack or somewhere in the folder.
Right.
Yeah. A collaborator of mine did this very cool framework for thinking about like friction between kids and parents. And it's not just, he developed this framework, but I actually did the study with him. I'd forgotten about this. We did a study where we never wrote this one up too. Oh my God, I didn't realize this is turning into just like various illustrations of my laziness and lack of follow through. I'm sorry.
Oh yes, I didn't finish that either.
we did this really cool study where we gave kids $5, high school kids, and we said, the money's yours, but just so you know, the test you're going to take in a week, we're going to call your parents and tell them how you do on the test. Okay. So we gave you $5 and it's yours, and we're going to call your parents and tell them how you did no matter what. But if you give us the $5 back, we won't tell your parents how you did on the test, meaning you can prevent us from telling your parents information about what's going on in school. And something like 25% of kids gave us the $5 back. Like, don't tell my parents. And like, just to illustrate like the friction. Not all information is getting back to parents.
Oh my gosh. That was revealing for sure.
I should dig that one out. I like that one. I'd forgotten about that one. We didn't end up publishing that one either. Shoot.
All right, now we're giving you a to-do list, Todd.
That's right.
We have your publication to-do list, and we're going to follow up with you. We're going to give you $5.
Yeah, there we go.
You keep your $5. Don't follow up. There you go.
Oh. Well, Todd, I want to ask you a question. You know, we've talked about mode of information, but what about the content? I believe that sometimes we do all this educationese talk with all these acronyms, and I wonder if people even understand what we're talking about if you're not in education. I mean, does that matter?
That is what I focus the most on right now, which is basically what is the science of the science of writing so busy people will read and respond. And it turns out that behavioral science across all the fields, but especially psychology, cognitive psychology, social psychology, and behavioral economics, has a lot to say about the principles for how do we write so busy people read. And I'm actually, the first principle is fewer words.
Love that.
It's so like we've done tons of these randomized experiments. So like think about the vaccines, the clinical trials where they have a treatment group and a control group. We do all these experiments where one group gets a long version. Like I did one with a national Senate campaign where they sent a 6-paragraph fundraising email to 600,000 people. And half of them, we just deleted arbitrarily every other paragraph. So it wasn't even coherent anymore, but it was 3 paragraphs instead of 6. And then we looked at what happened to donations, and they raised more money, 20% more money with the incoherent one, but shorter. We did other ones where I worked with a big organization that has this big mailing list where they want people to click and read stuff. And they wrote their best, they sent it to me, and I said, okay, now cut it in half. And they had and then we did an experiment. They cut it in half. And obviously it takes a lot of time to write concisely. There's this famous quote by Blaise Pascal, often attributed to Mark Twain, that I would have written you a shorter letter if I'd had more time.
More time.
And
yes.
And so what we did was that they wrote it themselves. They cut it in half versus the original. And when they cut it in half, it doubled the clicks, the people clicking through.
Wow.
So the first principle is fewer words. It's so central that I thought that the best way to convince people to use fewer words was to write a long book about it. So I'm working on a book about it.
I love that.
That's good.
Yeah, so, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask, so your mode and then the content, and is there a difference between, the content and the presentation of it? Is there something that should be done with respect to how it's provided as well?
So there are several more principles that we can talk about later. Fewer words is not the only one, but it's probably the most important. Yeah. But you're asking an important question where, like, I write an email to you, and it is 3 paragraphs. And my least favorite part of communicating is when people bury the question in like the 3rd paragraph, through the 3rd paragraph, and like I'm not going to read right now the 4-paragraph email. But I do want to. I know that I'm going to get back to how you frame it, but my wife reminds me it's not just about being more effective. When you write with fewer words, you lower the reading level so it's more accessible. You make it so that it's structured so it can be skimmed. There's a bunch of other principles. It's not just more likely that people read and respond. It's also just kinder. If it would have taken them 4 minutes,
right?
Yeah. If it would have taken 4 minutes and now it takes 1, you're just saving them time. And the other way of framing it is going from 1 to 4. You're wasting their time because you weren't willing to put the time in to edit it down. Additionally, it's also just more accessible. Like the average reading level of an American head of household is 9th grade reading level. We learn to write well, but that's different than writing effectively.
Yes.
And our sentences may be 3 lines long with parentheticals and clauses and really impressive erudite vernacular, but simple words will do.
Right. Yes, I think simple words are better. Absolutely. Yeah.
But Jamie asked this question about like, how do we frame it? And there is a trade-off. Like, you're not wrong. I think your intuition is 100% right. That like, if I cut it's dear parent, we're so grateful for all that you for sticking with us. And it's been a hard year. And we know that everybody's trying their best. Thank you. Your kid's great. Please show up for parent-teacher conferences next week, right? Like, you would have you have a relationship, and you're trying to build trust, and you're trying to convey respect, but you're also wasting their time. And so there is a trade-off where sometimes cutting words doesn't have the human courtesies, means cutting some of the human courtesies. It's not necessarily the case that conciseness requires discourteousness, because you could say, we know it's been a hard year. Thanks for sticking with us. Please show up to parent-teacher conferences, instead of 4 lines of it.
Right.
And so I worked with a large district, one of the 10 largest districts in the country, that I'm not sure if we're allowed to say who it is, who did this big experiment where we were texting to get over the summer to get all their families to respond to a survey about summer school. And what we found was that adding the sentence, we know it's been a hard year. Thank you for participating, and we are trying our best, and we know you are too. Then please fill out the survey. And it was a text message. Adding that sentence decreased response rates.
Decrease them.
Yeah, because people skim even text messages. Everyone's busy, but what the district decided was that's worth it. Like, it's more important that the families know that we respect them and are trying to honor their kid and them, than that we increase response rate by some percent.
I got you.
And so they're trade-offs.
Yeah. Okay. So they're looking at not just their why, but also prioritizing, like building relationships. It was up there. So they really needed to include that sentence, even though they were risking people not reading it, because they needed to, and instead of setting 2 separate, they wanted to put it into 1. So they led with that. Thank you. And then went into the good stuff. Still concise, still respectful, but putting in those 2 priorities. I gotcha.
Yeah, it's great. Jamie, you nailed it though. Not 2, but 1, because what we also did was we did an experiment. When we separate them out, even using formatting of text helps, where that same problem they had, when we added all of the sentences other than please fill out the survey in the top message, then we cut that last sentence, please fill out the survey, to be a second message, allowing basically the visual formatting of text to emphasize the fill out of the survey, but also conveying the other respectful, human, courteous content. That was better than adding them all in one message, right? And so like using the formatting to pull out the action to be taken.
Right. The action. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I've been actually playing with that a little bit, because when you said exactly it. I'll write something and then I'll be like, there's too much stuff on here. So then it takes more time. And then I pull stuff out that is not necessary, but then I feel like I still just want what I want, and I want them to give it to me. So I need to figure out how they're going to see what I want. So I bold things or bullet or both. And then that way they see those 3 words. Okay. Now, I don't know if that's going to be helpful or not, because some of the message might get skipped, but I know that everyone's so busy. So at least they'll see these things. Is that a trick? Is that helpful? Or is it going to be something less? Am I going to not get the results I want?
You look, Jamie, you've already anticipated several of the studies that we've run.
Okay.
So I probably should have just thought, let's talk after this. Tell me what the other hypotheses
I'll join your study.
Tested are. Because exactly what you said, highlighting and bolding, readers interpret as signaling what the writer thinks is most important.
Okay.
Right? Exactly like you thought. And so when you highlight or bold, readers jump to that. We actually have these studies where they just jump to that, and then they just try and sense make around it. They don't read linearly. They jump and then they and so it is, when you highlight or bold something, people are more likely to get to do or understand exactly what you highlight and bolded, but they're also less likely to read everything else.
Right.
And so we've actually shown that when you highlight or bold one thing, you decrease the reading of everything else, which is like a trade-off that we often are fine with.
Right.
But so it's why you need to be judicious in what it is that you're directing attention to through this formatting. Because sometimes if we're not careful and we don't know what the most important thing in our message is, then we'll bold or highlight the wrong thing and not and derail.
And I worry about that too. And then I guess also, learning styles come into play too with what personal preference is. So you kind of have to reach everyone in some way, which I think is probably tricky too.
Yeah. The way that I have worked with school districts to do it is because I don't know what's important. And honestly, these messages are often written partly by lawyers and partly by superintendents and principals who are concerned about the politics of it. So it's not just about effectiveness. It's both effectiveness plus CYA. And so all the, think about the COVID disclosures and mask rules and whatever, you could just convey them in 2 sentences, but instead they're long essays. At minimum, you just want to make it navigable to someone who's racing. So everyone is skimming. And so what we've done is you can have all the content you want, but put headings and make it so they can jump around. If it's a 7-paragraph email and there's only 2 ideas in it, then put a heading that says idea 1, and then the core content, maybe even indented, idea 2. All of it's in there, and make the first sentence clear. Below, we talk about idea 1 and idea 2. This action needs to be taken. And then you basically, the idea is right for skimmers, make it navigable for skimmers.
We call that chunk and chew in teaching. A lot of times just chunk it, chew up that little piece, chunk it, chew up that little piece. Yes. And it is good. I've worked with some people though that get mad if someone highlights or bolds things because they say, don't they think I know what the important thing is? Personally, I like it because I like to just look at it and see, but I have worked with some people that really get offended by that. So Todd, we have to think of all of these things. It's very complicated.
Yeah, and I do it for the other person, but I also do it for me so that when I look back at that message, I can see what the deliverable should be and what I need from that, because it's helpful. Oh yeah, that was the point of that. When I'm going back and trying to circle back and get, Yeah,
I personally like it, but I've worked with several people that do not like that. So,
I can see that.
Yeah,
that's really interesting. I still think it's worth it, but you have to make your own trade-offs.
Yeah.
A way to get around that is to just structure it so that it's formatted without bold and highlighting. It's just structured into sections. The idea. So this idea of make it navigable to skimmers was partly inspired by a study that some friends of mine ran with the New York City Police Department, where they give citations, 350,000 citations a year where you're supposed to show up in court. And 50% of people don't show up. And if you don't show up, it leads this terrible cascade of contact with law enforcement and disproportionately hurts Black and brown families in New York. And so what these guys, and the thing is called a citation. And the first couple lines is the police officer. The second couple lines is the offense. And then down the bottom is what you're supposed to do. They just rewrote it. And they said, criminal court appearance ticket. And then they said, you need to show up here at this time on this date. This is the offense and this is the officer. Just basically rewrote it so a skimmer could figure out what the point was. And they pretty dramatically reduced failures to appear in court, which just prevents, it's good for everybody. It's
your purpose and your why at the top. I mean, it goes back to that. It really makes much more sense. What is it that you want them to do? Don't bury it, put it at the top, and then they can panic, right? You get that panic mode. What is this for? And then they go down below instead of what, and then toss it. I get it. It makes so much sense. It really does.
Yeah.
Todd, what are other tips that you could give educators? Oh, I'm thinking classroom teachers, administrators, superintendents, in effectively communicating with families or even their staff on how we can get them to read what we say.
And again, it's about
your words.
But again, it's not just instrumentally about helping us get through. It's also about being respectful and kind to the recipient. I just want to it's not just,
Gotcha.
and I know you got that, but I know that that I'm so focused on how do we effectively communicate, but it's also just unkind to waste people's time. One thing that you both were alluding to is if it's important to us, we should make it easy for them. If it's important to us, we should make it easy for them. And so like I worked with one school district that has a Navy base in it. And for those of you aren't familiar, if a kid lives on a base, they're entitled to go to the local public school, but they don't pay property taxes into the local district. But the Defense Department will reimburse the district. But that reimbursement will only happen if the family fills out a form. And as you would expect, this ends up being a real problem. But a problem that is like goes to the bottom line for the district. And so working with them, we're like, well, why don't we just pre-populate the form and just have them sign it instead of having to fill it out themselves? And that led to a 1/3 increase in completing the forms, which is like, just if it's important to us, we want to make it as easy as possible for you.
Absolutely. And so many times we ask people to go out and find the form. Well, I think you have just drop, I'm not looking for that. It doesn't do me any good. Yeah. Oh, I love that idea. Make it easy.
Another one is I did this project with Hetty Chang, who runs Attendance Works, and Jessica Lasky-Fink and Carly Robinson, who are two collaborators of mine, in California. When current Vice President Kamala Harris was Attorney General then, and working with her and her team when she was Attorney General, we rewrote the Notice of Truancy, which is a state-mandated form written by lawyers in Sacramento, not even written for humans. It's only written for lawyers. And it's written in a...
So true.
Yeah.
I just got
you're right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. Yes. Lawyers. I'm told lawyers are humans too.
Yeah.
And so what we did was we turned it from 350 words to 150 words, but we also changed the reading level from like college reading level to 5th grade reading level, just like making it as accessible as possible, which is not just about making it accessible to people who can't read at a college reading level, though that too. Everybody just is more likely to read and reads faster when it's easier to consume. And then we did a randomized experiment with 130,000 families in California, where when they were eligible, they either got the standard one or the simplified, like written in an accessible way one. And we found that when they got the more accessible one, it was 40% more effective at increasing attendance in the subsequent 30 days. So like the idea is write in an accessible way, which is why Everyday Labs, the attendance organization we spun out of my lab, like constantly does these sort of A/B testing on like, well, how do we write in a way that maximizes comprehensibility while also maximizing the impact on attendance? And so I guess that gist is like, we should also constantly be testing if we can.
Right. Do you consider people's feelings too? I know you said be respectful and kind, but if I'm getting a letter about truancy for my child, do you think about how the parent feels when they get that letter? Like, you're a bad parent. You know what I mean? Does that work into this?
It does. I mean, we're trying to do so that we put in this sort of category of make it relevant and respectful to the recipient.
Yes.
Because the actual first sentence of that, which I wish I had in front of me right now, of that Notice of Truancy, which is a state mandated like form, and just to like differentiate, the truancy process has incredible in many ways is an engine for exacerbating inequity. It also is weirdly punitive instead of like an asset-based and like assisting families.
You're exactly right.
So when I talk about like our research, it exists, and there are tens of millions of truancy notifications sent home every year. As long as they're sent home, they may as well be written in a way that is accessible and effective. But one of the changes we also made was we made it much more asset-based and talked about how do we help you? Like, how do we partner? Because we've shared interests.
Right.
Totally, definitely. That is, but in that point I was just trying to distill was just lowering the reading level really helps. Cutting words really helps. But true that like the certain systems, also we talk about that study with the police force. Like, the escalation for not showing up because you got a minor infraction and then the police eventually it accumulates, terrible for people. You could imagine rethinking the whole system. And we should. But in the meantime, as long as the system continues to be, chasing down the 53% of people who don't show up to court, we may as well maximize the effectiveness of these communications to let people know, at least who didn't even realize when they looked at the document, they're supposed to show up.
Right.
Simple communication, changes in communication can make a world of difference. And I think your absentee study is probably one of the most important, probably, because, what is that number that you gave? How many letters go, how many students are truant or absent?
By my estimate, there's 72 million kids and something like a third end up being qualifying for truancy notification.
Right.
So, but the different states have different rules. And like in California, there's like 3 or 4 of them that go out for the first 12 absences. So you just, I imagine in California alone, there are probably 10 million of these that go out. But that's not the best intervention for reducing absenteeism that we've ever done is, and I think I showed this to Jerry a while ago, that this 5 to 7 rounds of communication that is very asset-based, but directing parents' attention to the importance of attendance, but also very carefully data informed by parents lose track of how many total days their kid has been absent. So they underestimate. My kid has been absent 20 days. I think 10. Consistently across districts, we've seen that they reduce absenteeism that they underestimate by 50%. Also, the families of kids who miss more days than their classmates, the vast majority of them think that their kid attends school as much or more than their classmates. They just sort of there's this presumption, which is a psychological tendency we call false consensus effect, that everybody else shares our views and behaves like us. And so we found with these repeated rounds of mail, and we layer in text, though that's not as effective as the mail, that ends up, this sort of program of communication can reduce chronic absenteeism by 15% district-wide, but it's ultimately a communications intervention with this sort of tested aspects of communications. So I sort of say that as the truancy thing is this separate problem, and it's a system where it's automated and bureaucratic and very punitive, deficit-based. But there's this sort of parallel, we communicate all the time, and it should be as effective as possible. And sometimes even sort of building in new programs of communication with specific foci or whatever, a focus can be more effective.
Yeah. So you take care of numbers. So you're better communicating to accommodate what their perception is, right? So you're giving numbers or graphs or things like that to help them see where your student falls. But I guess what Jerry said too, in a way that doesn't make them feel like they're a bad parent. Also, I guess, is there a way to make it not so punitive? How do you work toward that?
So one, it turns out we've learned from these experiments that, so for example, the attendance stuff now happens through Everyday Labs. They ran 19 randomized experiments just last academic year on absenteeism. We're testing this message versus that, this modality versus that. And one of the things we previously learned was if you end up comparing a kid to my kid has missed 20 days and you compare me to the class average of 3, that's discouraging. And it ends up being counterproductive because it actually just I'll never catch up. But if you compare a kid with 20 absences to 19, a class average or a median of 19, then it's actually attainable and actually it's useful to add that. So you only include a comparator if it's in the sort of sweet spot of achievability. And then you phrase the whole thing as we all are on the same team of wanting the kid to succeed. Clearly something is going on. Here's some resources. And then on the back, there's just all these resources that the district offers to help.
Gotcha.
So, But
We're
actually,
in this
one small
together. We're in this together. I like that. Yeah.
because we all share interest in the kid's success. The one thing that we learned that I would never have thought of is I'm used to seeing graphs. Actually, when you think of a graph, do you think of it going up and down or side to side? Jamie, and then
I don't know, like hopefully up and
I'm sorry,
down,
a bar graph,
side to side.
graph,
Yeah.
A bar graph?
A bar or
Yeah,
line graph?
a bar graph, just a bar graph.
Oh,
Yeah,
just
so-
a bar graph, I see.
So when I think of it up and down, the
Yeah,
bars.
the bar is up and down.
Right. Both of you. That's exactly what that's how we write in papers, and that's how we do it.
Right.
We did a bunch of testing with parents, and normal humans who don't consume data all the time. I mean, ClassLink is ultimately like very data intensive. You guys are data people. Normal humans find it way more intuitive, like horizontal bar graphs, left to right, than up down. And it was, I had no idea. So like after some testing, now all of our graphs go left, right, because they're just easier to understand. But whatever, like there's no underlying key psychology to that. There's just, it turns out we just want to communicate in a way that people are ready to consume it.
Yes, right. Yeah, and I think that we just think that people know what we know about analytics and looking at graphs, and we don't take into consideration that this isn't in their wheelhouse and they don't do this every day. So I think that's really important too. Oh, I do have a specific question. Can I ask? If we are using email, does that tagline make a difference if people open it or not?
Oh, yeah.
The subject line?
The subject line.
Subject line.
Yes, it matters a ton. But there ultimately there aren't any like you should use this. It's
darn.
It's there's so like for example, when I did the politics stuff, I started an organization called the Analyst Institute, where we were the hub of the left on behavioral science and data science, and we helped the Obama team run experiments. And one of the things that they learned, and this was independent of us, but this was another experiment that they had run internally, was that the single subject line that worked best in 2008 for raising money, you guys have probably, I don't know if you've heard this. Do you want to guess what the subject line was from, Senator Barack Obama sends you an email, and what's the subject line that led to the most money?
Ooh, I don't know. We need you. Who does Uncle Sam say? That wouldn't be it.
It was, hey.
Hey?
Hey.
H-E-Y. Hey. Well, all lowercase. Hey. And the reason, who knows? I mean, the reason is hard to know with certainty, but at the time, the interpretation was that people were like, maybe this is a personal message, because the hey, you only say that to your friends.
Close friends.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so it's sort of for them, the first challenge is capturing people's attention long enough to get them into the message.
Yeah.
Right. And so in that case, you would put quotes around the envelope of the email is the sender and subject line.
Mm-hmm.
And the envelope has to be compelling enough that they want to go check out the rest. And in that case, they were sort of like hacking the fact that we are confused by a subject line that says, hey, and we think maybe that's a friend.
Yeah.
But eventually that became widespread, and it stopped being, they stopped successfully getting through. And so like the point is that there is an envelope around your email, which is the sender and the subject line. And hopefully, and I would take an ethical stand on that your subject line should not deceive about what's in it. But like you would want people to know exactly what's in it as concisely as possible. And so the subject line is part of that envelope that you want to make it really clear. And honestly, if they know what's in it and they decide it's not worth reading, like then it's good.
They weren't going to do anything anyway, right? Yeah.
But like we want them to know it. But if they don't want to, like if we say new testing procedures in the high school, that's a subject line. And then they decide that's not something they want to read about. Like, great, we just saved them the 3 minutes it was going to take them to read something they didn't care to know. Yeah. So it's even more respectful to make it really clear. And if they're motivated to know it, let them know. we don't need to be paternalistic and sort of like coerce them to read it.
Right, right. I always tend to read the emails that have so it's as if it were a reply. So I thought, oh gosh, I have to follow up. What is this? And then it's really nothing, but that is not, I'm not gonna say clickbait, but it definitely draws my attention for sure.
That's the right word. I like that word. It's clickbait. I was referring to it as a hack, but it's just like the hey. It's confusing you. It's confusing you. And I think that that's not ethical. But as long as we are able to tell them what's in it, the reader should be able to decide, is this something that's worth their time right now?
Hey, this is about blank.
Right.
Regarding
regarding something you've never seen, but I'm acting like you did. But this is what it's about. Yeah.
Have you done any research on newsletters from like teachers, school districts? Are those effective? Not.
It depends what your goal is, right? So like the newsletters are different. People are going to have different derive value from different aspects of your newsletter. And so it's a very pluralistic objective, right? Some people will care about homecoming, and some people will care about the scholarship you're announcing, and some people will care about the principal leaving.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I think the big takeaway is everyone is busy, everyone is skimming, make it navigable, and basically like really use this lens of how do I respect people's time, not in addition to because it's kind, but also because it's more effective. I want to last metaphor. I have a lawyer. We bought a house, and so we're involving a lawyer, to for the house. And I wrote an email to the lawyer, and it was meandering. And I immediately, my wife and I edited it and got it much more concise. And I was like, that guy's charging us by the minute. I do not want to give him anything.
Good point.
Anything he does that. But and I was like, imagine if we treated our readers with that level of respect. We're like, it's like if we treated readers like we valued every minute of theirs the way we do my overpriced lawyer for a house.
Right.
Then that would be a totally different orientation. The key information.
That's a great way to look at it.
Good point.
Yeah.
So many nuggets of tips regarding, from the mode to the content presentation. This was enlightening. I just think your research is so intriguing. I love it. I think it's so great.
And you have a book coming out?
Oh.
Do you have a book coming out?
I've already introduced you to several dimensions of my laziness. So,
busyness, not laziness, busyness.
We're working on this book. It will be out next year in 2023.
Oh, good.
But it is this underlying science of this with the really specific principles and checklists.
Right.
Good.
Very helpful.
Well, we'll have you back on when that comes out.
Yes, absolutely. So Todd, we'd like to end our podcast with asking our guest, through all of this work that you've done as Harvard professor, everyday labs, what has become clear?
That everyone is busy.
Yes.
And we should respect them and be kind to them by communicating effectively, which is different than writing beautiful, grammatically correct sentences and essays.
Sure. Yeah.
Right.
Bottom line. And it's tricky to do that. Like you said, it does take time, but it's worth it in the end for sure.
And is keeping it simple a good way to get started?
Sure. Yes. Keep it simple is even more concise than my 15-word sentence there.
Yes.
It was a good one.
Well, it was a pleasure to have you on. Where can people find you online if they want to learn more about Everyday Labs, or maybe they would like you to consult with their school district? Where can we find you?
For the absenteeism stuff, it's for reducing district-wide absenteeism using programs of communication, Everyday Labs, so everydaylabs.com. For my research, my Harvard website, if you just search Todd Rogers, Harvard, you'll get it. Interestingly, the most famous Todd Rogers is an Olympic volleyball player who won the gold medal in 2008. So you got to add the Harvard part, otherwise you get
Otherwise, we're looking at volleyball.
you get this 6'5" ripped guy. That I'm neither of those things. And then on Twitter at Todd_Rogers_ extra underscore. And on Twitter, I only communicate about parent engagement and parent like asset-based approaches, like research on how to help families, not the communication stuff yet.
Yes. Well, one of the things that we have been doing following up our podcast is having our guest on Clubhouse. Are you on Clubhouse?
I don't no,
he doesn't know what it is.
I'm a million years old. Tell me what I've never been on Clubhouse. I've heard about it.
Right. So it's a social platform that we get on. We have our guest on. You're not seen, you're only heard. And people from all over the world really show up. We talk about what the topic is, and then people can ask you questions. You can talk about the research that you're doing. And it's 1 hour, but it's usually a great conversation of letting other people ask you some questions that they're interested in. So we'll follow up with you and see if that is of interest to you. And you could try your maiden voyage on Clubhouse, maybe.
I look forward to learning about it. Thank you.
You bet. You bet. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. This was great. I have 3 pages of notes.
I know, I have all these notes here too.
So, Jamie, our communication is going to be so much more effective.
Yeah, we got to work on it.
Yes. Yes.
Thanks for having me. This is really fun.
You bet. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. And if you would like to stay linked up, be sure to follow us on Apple and Spotify and subscribe to us on YouTube.